I'm from a divorced family and have a lot of trust issues. And I think I walked into a blended family having a good foundation for how to be a step parent, but a really poor foundation for how to be a wife. And so how I took control of the situation was to take control of our home. And while that looked like it functioned for us on the outside, it was deteriorating the inside of my heart.
Hi, everyone. This is Family Life Blended, and I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast helps blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. So glad you've joined us in this journey. Welcome to episode number 81, Bonus Moms, Refined for Good. And since yesterday was Mother's Day, it's perfect timing for an episode about being a stepmom. So let me start with a heartfelt happy Mother's Day for all our listening moms, stepmothers, grandmothers, foster mothers, and any woman who's investing in the life of a child. I just want you to know we see you, and we are very grateful for how you serve. Let me remind you about my book, The Smart Stepmom, co-authored with Laura Petherbridge. Since 2009, this book continues to be a best-selling book for stepmoms. Now here's the deal. It's a deep dive into the role of being a stepmother, but it includes 2 chapters for your husband, so he can know how to support you as the wife in your home. I think that makes the book very balanced. Why don't you check it out if you're not familiar with it? The show notes will tell you how. You know, you may have heard me say on this podcast before that I believe family and relationships are part of God's refining fire in our lives. Learning how to love, forgive, show kindness, and be family to one another requires that we become more and more like Christ. So family life grows us up. Well, stepmotherhood is no different. That's our topic today. My first guest on this episode is no stranger to our audience. Gayla Grace serves on staff with Family Life Blended. She's a writer and speaker. She's the author of Step Parenting with Grace, a devotional for blended families. And she's the co-author of Quiet Moments for the Stepmom Soul. She's got a master's degree in psychology and counseling, and she's been married to Randy in a his, hers, and ours blended family since 1995. Summer Butler is an author, speaker, and Bible study leader. She walks with women, couples, and teens through the struggles of blended family life. Her new book is Blended, Aligning the Hierarchy of Heart and Home. She grew up in a blended family, and she and her husband, Andy, have a yours and ours blended family. Here's my conversation with Gayla Grace and Summer Butler. All right, ladies, I appreciate you both being with me today. We know around here at Family Life Blended, we've heard for years about what a difficult day Mother's Day is for a lot of people. Actually, it runs the gamut, the feedback that we get from people. Some love it. Some hate it. Some experience everything in between. And some people, over time, experience everything in between. I'm just curious. I'd like to hear from both of you. What has your Mother's Day experience been like so far? Gayla, why don't you go first?
I would say in my early years, when my expectations were in places that they shouldn't have been, my Mother's Day was hard. And I think over time, as a stepmom, I began to adjust my expectations and just be thankful if my stepkids chose to honor me in any way. But to honestly know that they need to honor their biological mom. It's very natural that they want to, and that needs to take precedence over me as a stepmom. And because I do have biological kids, then I can be honored from my biological kids. And that is a blessing, obviously. So I do feel like, though, as stepmoms, we need to be careful about our expectations.
Okay.
And I even would say, if you're a stepmom and you don't have kids of your own, that you might have to have a conversation with your husband and just say, please know that I know your kids may not honor me in any way, but I think it's important if you would, because of my role that I play with your kids.
Well, I heard that loud and clear, what you said about expectations and when your expectations were out of line. My guess is we're going to come back to that a little bit later in this conversation. Summer, let me turn to you. What has your Mother's Day experience been like?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, Gail, that was such a good response because it's similar, I think, in line with mine as far as, in the beginning, I don't think you know what you don't know, right? Like when you experience that first Mother's Day as a stepmom,
Right.
if your expectations are misaligned, it is disappointing for sure because our dynamic is, I'm a full-time stay-at-home stepmama. So for me, and we'll get into this too, but doing a lot of the grunt work, in my opinion, my expectation was I should deserve a lot of the reward after that. And Mother's Day was a day set aside in my mind for that. While I will give my husband a lot of props, he always made that day also special for me. And the kids would always also say Happy Mother's Day to me. But I think when my expectations were not aligned correctly, it became a day for self-pity and self-righteousness in a lot of ways. And I agree with you, Gayla. It's a special day for moms, and that's not our role in their lives. But that takes some refining for sure.
Yes. And so today being the day after, if somebody's listening to this, you may be on the downward slide after Mother's Day, and all the emotions that you just heard a little bit about could be running through you minute by minute, changing up, down, all over the place. Where do you go with all those emotions? Like, what do you guys do when all that's raging inside you? My guess it's a great idea to go to your husband and just pour all this out on him. Is that a fabulous idea or is that a lousy? I don't know. It depends on what the emotions are, right?
Well, we've probably both done that, right, Summer?
Yeah, for sure.
And there's some things that your husband can do to receive that and hug that, but there's other things he can't fix. So it's just, that's complicated.
Yeah, it is. We've had to learn how to communicate ahead of time. Like, I need you to feel this, not fix it. That's kind of my code word for my husband to like, don't try to fix this situation. I just need to feel my way through it. Because sometimes I feel like he's trying to rescue me out of a situation that I don't necessarily need to be rescued from. I need to just feel my way through it. And so whenever I was walking through hard times, with Mother's Day specifically, I think when I look at my heart position, it was that I was basing my worth in my work. And for all the stepmamas out there that still do that, and I do too, I'm human, right? And so I just have to check myself often. But when I started to realize my worth is found in Christ and outside of that title, I started to disengage from making these holidays matter more than I think they do. I don't know that it matters so much as much as we put pressure on them. So I think give yourself grace. Obviously, what you're feeling is normal. That spiral, that mental spiral is normal. But know in your heart of hearts that your worth is not found in your work. It's not found in your title. It's not found in one day of appreciation. Your worth is found in Christ.
Yeah, and I do love what you said about helping your husband just acknowledge your feelings, acknowledge your pain, that it is okay for us to have those feelings still, and they don't have to fix it. The other thing I would add is, so I've celebrated 27 Mother's Day now as a stepmom, and so we just have to keep it in perspective that maybe you didn't have a great Mother's Day yesterday. It doesn't mean that every Mother's Day is going to play out like yesterday did.
Say a little more about the overtime thing. Sometimes you have bad Mother's Days and they get better?
Right. They can get better. Sometimes I've had bad Mother's Day with my biological girls during their teenage years. I remember having some hard Mother's Day years. So, you just pick yourself up. You ask the Lord for grace and strength to move into the next day and know that you can build a better future and you can have a good one in the future.
Summer, this past weekend, I just happened to be driving on the Dallas Tollway. It is a frightening place to be. Lots of traffic, people moving fast. Love that speed limit, boy. You can just boogie on through, but boy, is it a little scary. You had a come to Jesus moment, it sounds like. You write about in your book, Blended. You had a moment on the North Dallas Tollway where God gave you a perspective about your role as a stepmom. Tell us the story and what did you learn?
So when Andy and I met, he had both the boys full time, and they were pretty young, 6 and 8. And we were pretty far along in our journey at this point, and just had not been doing things right. And I say we, but I'm going to take my responsibility in that I really had veered off the path of good intentions. And it was a slow process doing that. But this all kind of was boiling. I was getting our oldest ready for winter formal, which is a pretty big deal down here. I'm sure it's a big deal everywhere, but I'm kind of an organizer, a planner. Like, I like things in order. And all of the plans were ready for the weekend. I felt like everything was in place. I was driving down the tollway, and it just kind of hit me that as I was putting the plans in order, the dance didn't fall on our weekend. And so I had gotten this jolt of just really anger and resentment that I had done all this work, and here we go again. I don't get the reward in this. And at that moment, it was really all about me and what I would get out of my good works. And I felt God really tug at me and say, pull off the road. I need you to pull off the road. And it was a command. It was not really anything I could ignore. I was really just like, okay. And I did that.
Yes, Lord,
I'll do that. I want you to write this down. Yeah, okay. I will obey. That's a lot. So pulled over, and he said, I want you to write this down. And he said, you are not raising these children so they grow up and call you their mother. You are raising these children so they grow up and call me their father.
Somebody just needs to absorb that one more time. Would you just say it one more time?
Yeah, I will. So he said to me, Summer, you are not raising these children so they grow up and call you their mother. You are raising these children so they grow up and call me their father. And I had to sit with that, to be completely honest, for a few years, because in the moment, I, in my spiritually haughty self, didn't think I had been working all this time to be their mother. Like, that was not an intention of my heart. They don't call me mom. I'd always been very clear that was not I didn't have the intention of coming in and taking over that role. And so I wrestled with God through that statement. And really, most recently, what he has shown me, even between the writing of the book and now, is that all along, I really hadn't been chasing that title of mom. I had been chasing the title of God in their life. And, that's a punch in the gut. And so kind of over the process of that refining process and him showing me like what I was doing wrong and how I needed to do things differently, I graciously stepped off that pedestal that I had created for myself. And I gave that highest seat back to God, and through that act of obedience, been able to kind of journal my way through that process to help other stepmoms and moms and blended families really put into perspective one of the scriptures he gave me, which is 1 Peter 5:2-4. And it talks about, we are to shepherd the flock that is placed under our care, and not because we must, but because we are eager to serve him, right? And eager to serve those that he places under our care. And they're actually his sheep, and we are to shepherd them back to him and not necessarily to us.
That is so good. And I really want to come back to that shepherding idea. Let's unpack that here in just a minute. But before we do, Gayla, I'd love to get your reaction to the little piece in there where she said she realized she really was trying to be God to the kids. Now, you've spent a lot of time, started the Sisterhood of Stepmoms, weekends for stepmoms. You spent a lot of time in this space, not only as somebody living it, but as somebody working with others. Do you hear that sort of thing? Like, without people realizing it, do you think they're working to be central in the lives of their stepchildren? And is that part of the setup?
It could be. It could also be defined maybe as an idol that you are choosing. You're working so hard because you painted in your mind, as Summer was saying, that you know that you're the stepmom, you're not the biological mom, but you need some definition of who are you really, because there's so much ambiguity in the stepmom role. And so you're just constantly fighting this confusion and what is my role, and I'm getting rejected, and yet I have to do all this grunt work, and it's confusing. And so I think it's easy to begin to decide that I should have some reward. I should have something here for what I'm doing, whether that means that, how we're defining it.
Yeah. Summer, practically for you, what did that mean that you couldn't be their God anymore? You couldn't be central in their life. You talk about that as a refining fire in your world, but practically, what does it mean to not try to be that central in their world anymore? Where does that leave you?
Yeah, I had to really sit back and consider where I was trying to control versus guide, I guess, and where I was trying to lord over instead of shepherd, I think, to kind of go back to that analogy. And practically, that meant taking some steps back. And there was a lot of unhealthy dynamics that had led to that point. I was so insecure in the beginning of our marriage that I really wanted all of the communication to go from biomom to me. And while that, I think, worked well in our family in the beginning, it started to misalign my heart and in that misalign our home. And so I think, we try to function out of a triangle of husband, wife, God, husband, wife. And what that did was put us in a triangle of ex-wife, wife, husband. In the process of learning where I was trying to control, that was one aspect that I had to let go of and just start to trust my husband to handle the situations outside of our home on his own without me being a part of that or having to read the text.
Yeah. I love the way you've connected that to your insecurity, that there was something missing there for you and you weren't feeling, I'm not sure how to say this, but central enough to the family, to the kids, to your relationship with your husband. Something there wasn't really solid or safe, maybe is a way to say it. And so you thought, if I can orchestrate this stuff over here, my role as stepmom and my importance to the home, then my status goes up. Yes?
Yeah, and I think it is centralized in trust and fear, and a lot of that came from my background too. My growing up, I'm from a divorced family and have a lot of trust issues, and I think I walked into a blended family having a good foundation for how to be a step parent, but a really poor foundation for how to be a wife. And so how I took control of the situation was to take control of our home. And while that looked like it functioned for us on the outside, it was deteriorating the inside of my heart because I was not doing it out of pure intentions. But I didn't even know that. Like, that wasn't even a conscious, I wasn't like going in this vindictive. That's not at all my heart. But what I think the enemy did along the way was started to see these cracks in our marriage and was very eager to step into those and say to me, you need control over this. But what I know now is, like, the tighter grip I have, the quicker it is to fall through my hands. And so I had to let go of that.
Summer, I'm curious how your husband reacted to you wanting to be the central person of communication with his former spouse. Was he okay with that?
Yeah, actually, he was. And it was out of pure intentions on his part. I think he wanted to do whatever he could to help me feel secure, not recognizing that the root was fear, right? And so it was completely out of trusting me to handle it. And I think he really just wanted me to be happy.
And so then over time, though, did it become apparent that created more of the demise of relationships? Because that's not a natural place to be for a stepmom, biomom to be having communication like that.
Right. I think what it did for me, it started to build resentments because I wasn't in a place to do it authentically. I was doing it to be controlling. And so out of that, I started to build these little resentments. And then that became a barrier, in my opinion, between a natural healing process that needed to happen between the two bio parents, in all honesty. So what God started to show me was that I was becoming a barrier, not a bridge between our two homes.
Okay, ladies, I'm going to put my therapist hat on for just a second, because what you guys are talking about is so insightful. I don't want our listener to miss any bit of it. Here's a quick observation. Nan and I are, in our marriage seminars these days, we are talking more and more about how responding out of fear and pain let me say, more often than not, leads to bad things. It might lead to some temporary fix that you feel okay about, but in the long term, as you were just noticing there, Gayla, it doesn't work. And here's why. When you start out of fear or pain, whatever it is that you try to do, control, fix, orchestrate, is always going to leave you back in fear and pain. It's not going to resolve that. So you pick a situation, communicating with the other household. I'll jump into that. That'll elevate my status in my husband's heart and my stepkid's heart. And then all of a sudden, I won't have to have any fear that they're not accepting me anymore, only to discover that no matter how well it goes, it could go really pretty well. It might not, that's the other side of it. But even if it goes pretty well, you still end up kind of carrying around that fear and pain because that originated from within you. It's not something you can orchestrate on the outside and have it get rid of it on the inside. This is so important because in all the conversations I have with stepmoms, there's a high need for, you guys tell me what you think about this. Everybody wants to be respected and admired and appreciated for what they do as a stepmom. Of course they do. What's that all about? What's that driven out of? And what do you do with this notion that you can't orchestrate enough things on the outside to manufacture all of that?
Well, it comes because with stepchildren, the love doesn't happen automatically as it does with your biological kids. For instance, even if you mess up with your biological kid, they are going to love and forgive so quickly. If you mess up with a stepchild, there's going to be a grudge. It's going to take so long to heal that. And as a stepmom, you know that. And you know you have to work so much harder to get little ounces of love. Now, I'm speaking more within the early years. That does get better over time. It gets much better over time. But I would guess, Summer, that you're also talking about in your early years, that this is when you're working so hard and you're recognizing it had become a god.
Yeah, and I think, for us, it was a perpetuating, like you said, Ron, it's just a perpetuating cycle of ultimately personal sin, if I have to be completely transparent. And what that does is keeps us in this hole of, poor behaviors and then poor outcomes to those behaviors. And for me, when I was seeking my worth, like I said earlier, really in my work. And then when Andy would let me down, like he'd already given me this, I had control of it. This still wasn't fulfilling to me because it was external, not internal. And he couldn't fix the internal scars and wounds that I had, but I expected him to. I didn't understand he couldn't. And so when we started to become misaligned, there really had to be this pulling over on the tollway and God saying, you're not doing this the right way. And I need you to come to me. I need you to not even get back on the tollway, but to choose a whole new street. And in doing that, it really meant separating kind of emotionally. I don't want to say a total separation of emotion from Andy, but we had to get unenmeshed, right? Like I had to just walk away from expecting him to make right the wrongs in my life. That's not his job. And learning that control was a core issue for me. I had to work through that alone with God so that I could walk back into the situation a healthier person.
Do you have a practical example of what changed in you after this refining moment?
I think I have a few years of just, little first steps along the way. Like you can't make a big change without taking a small first step. And for me, after God kind of gave me that statement and really was showing me who I was, I had to just take the next right step in obedience. And I can give you a very practical answer. It's a little off topic, but the very first thing that he showed me was I had been putting my spiritual faith into yoga. And I know that can be a hot topic, but for me, he asked me to walk away completely from that lifestyle. And I chose obedience and I did that. And as soon as he asked, I obeyed. And that obedience kind of unblocked a lot of other blessings in my life that he had in store for me. And so that was one small step. I think we just have to sit still and listen. And sometimes when you don't have a strong walk or relationship with God, that seems daunting and scary. But if we just show up to that next right step that he's showing us. It may feel weird. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why he was asking me to walk away from yoga. But when I did, and now I can look back years later, I understand I was putting a lot of spiritual healing into that and not him. And so I think he just slowly gives me small steps to take that lead to great big changes in the end.
There's a real difference between the physical aspects of yoga and the spiritual aspects of yoga. Now, the other thing that I think is probably practical is this shepherding your stepchildren thing. And let's unpack that for a minute. John 10:14, Jesus calls himself the good shepherd, which, by the way, implies that we're sheep. You know how dumb sheep are.
Yeah, I do know how dumb they are.
Yep, that's me. I'm one of those. You feel like you've been given a flock, Summer. That's the way you've started thinking about it. And what a paradigm shift to go from, I need to be their mom, I need to be central in their life, to, wait a minute, I'm a shepherd, they're my flock. So what does that look like in everyday practical moments? I'd love to hear from both of you about that.
Well, one thing I would touch on that Summer mentioned earlier was, for one, you're doing the practical things, and that's going to include some of the grunt work. But when you notice that you're feeling resentful about what you're doing, that's when you need to take a step back and consider, am I doing too much, though? Am I stepping into a space that isn't the space I need to be in? Because if we sit in resentment, then it moves to bitterness. And so we got to pull back and consider, why do I feel resentful about what I'm doing? And that's a big issue, in my opinion, for step parents to always consider is, where am I at? Where's this resentment coming from?
Great. Oh, that's good. Good self-reflection there. Yeah. Summer?
Well, and speaking into that, and I think what I've realized along the way is that I have a really hard time having difficult conversations in the moment. And so I allow those resentments to build over time. And that's something that I've had to consciously work on. So if Andy hurts my feelings in the moment, I sit with that, pray over it, and then I have to address that, because otherwise we're 6 months down the road and that resentment bubbles over and I'm unleashing this entire conversation. And he's 6 months ago has no idea what I'm talking about. But to your question about shepherding, I think in 1 Peter it refers to Jesus as the chief shepherd. So much like in John. But what really gets me is towards the end of 1 Peter 5:2-4. And at the end it says that we work for a crown that will never fade, and that we will get that when we meet our chief shepherd. And so in the book, I write kind of about this aligning your heart. And we do have to, just like you said, Ron, realize that we are first his sheep. And if we are so spiritually haughty or so high on that platform like I was, I don't recognize that I need to work on self with him first and to align my heart and say, look, I am your sheep. I am here to do your work. And then I can recognize that these children that have been placed under my care are for me to shepherd, and not for me to grab their hand and want to hold on to that forever, but for me to take them by the hand and place it in his, because that's my job and that's my role. And I really think that goes for bio parents too. I mean, I really approach my own biological son in the same way. It's like and that takes intentional parenting for sure, not to want to lord over them, but to hand them off and say, God, how would you have me handle this situation? It's a tough one. I don't know how, and sit in that and then intentionally parent instead of react, I think, to situations.
Let me react for some of our listeners right now. If you do feel some appreciation from your stepchildren for all that you're doing for them, or from your husband for what you're doing, if you do feel some measure of respect, there's an occasional reward, a thank you, gratitude, that sort of thing. Wow, that goes a long way. That really helps you keep going.
Absolutely.
It's in the absence of that. It's the woman who wrote to me, emailed last week saying her husband won't set boundaries with his former wife, and she continually has to deal with the negative repercussions of her husband's unwillingness to do that. I'm thinking of the childless stepmom who's listening right now, who feels totally unappreciated, totally left out, doesn't have children of her own. I'm thinking of the stepmom who wants so badly to make a difference in the lives of her stepchildren. She sees some gaps. She really has something good to offer. Her intentions are great. She loves them so much. But for whatever reason, the family system just sort of sabotages her efforts, and she's forced to live with the status quo, and it's really frustrating. And you want me to think about the chief shepherd finally giving me my reward. Like, that's so far out there somewhere. You could just imagine somebody going, yeah, but what do I do today? How does someone sustain themselves in a tough situation?
You hang on to the little stuff because it's just like you said. Oftentimes there are small rewards. I think of one when I think my stepson was in high school, and where we were living at the time, we were under a tornado warning. It was in the middle of the day. He knows I don't watch TV in the day. I probably didn't have the radio, anything on. He texted me from his high school to say, Gayla, take shelter. We're under a tornado warning. That was huge to me. That's like he cares enough about me that he texted me to say, are you paying attention to the news? Because you might be in danger. Those are little rewards. Maybe you take that for granted when you have to step up and say, and when he came in that day, I remember I gave him a hug. I said, thank you for thinking enough of me that you sent me a text in the middle of the day, and that helped me know you cared. You have to hang on to those things as a stepmom. My husband, I remember him telling me that he kept a voicemail that one of my girls sent him, his stepdaughter, at some point. He kept that voicemail a long time, and he would listen to it at times when he was so angry at her. And he said, that just helped me in my stepdad role to know I'm doing okay some days. It may not seem like it all the time.
That's good.
Yeah. In the middle of the moments, we tend to feel like it's the only moment that ever will be, right? And we have this unrealistic perception that nothing's ever going to change. And to be completely honest, I know I have a lot of kind of in-your-face techniques with this, and maybe it's just because it's how God deals with me, but if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so if you're in the middle of these moments and you just feel like nothing's ever going to change, you can. And so my encouragement is to keep showing up with Christ. And that's where I had to go, because I've been in the moments. I've been in the middle of some really tough times where I didn't know if our marriage was going to make it. I didn't know if I could keep doing this. I didn't know if tomorrow was going to matter. I could see me walking away. I went there. But like I said before, if you can disengage from the moment, and if you can take that and show up with Christ and align your heart there, you will start to see little changes happen. Because if one person in a relationship changes, the relationship has to change. And I think you only experience that until you experience it, right? So I think my recommendation would be, or my experience has been, in the middle of those heated moments, or the moment where you feel so overwhelmed or so bogged down with, this, can I keep doing this? This is so defeating. It is, you're right, acknowledge that, but then realize, like, this is just one moment to a lifetime of opportunities that I'm going to have. And if you keep showing up with a heart eager to serve, it will start to shift.
You said earlier, the subtitle of your book is Aligning the Hierarchy of Heart and Home. Well, let's talk a little bit about hierarchy, priorities. We've had this conversation before at FamilyLife Blended, but it comes up often, and I always think there's another good reason for us to discuss it. It's sort of that, all right, what are your priorities? God first, marriage second, children, others. All right. Easy to say, really hard to do. How do we do this? Like, what are your thoughts and reflections on keeping those priorities in the right place? What does that mean for you? Where do you fit in there as a stepmom?
Well, first and foremost, I think my relationship with God is my responsibility. So I think we all have to, in every relationship, align ourselves, right? That is the only person we can control. And for me, that looks like being in a community of Christ followers that are what I consider, a life group that I can go to and study God's word and really stay in touch with, okay, maybe I have a resentment and I need somebody to say to me, okay, well, what does that say about you, Summer? What are you struggling with? Because we all play a part in every interaction that we have. And so if I can stay true to my relationship with Christ, then my heart is trying to stay aligned. You're right. It's hard. We're humans and we live in a world. What I have found, I guess, in walking with other women and other blended families is that we tend to compare our walks with our spouses and want to get into this, not necessarily argument, but what do we do if our spouse isn't also following Christ, and how do we handle that? And what if we're the only ones aligning? And there's a scripture, and what it talks about, that the believing spouse is an influence over the non-believing spouse. And maybe you know exactly where that's at, but I love that scripture for the couples that are struggling. It's that they are sanctified. That's the word that the scripture uses. It's like the non-believing spouse is sanctified by the believer's faith and walk. And really what it means is that they're influenced by it. And so if we can work on our own personal alignment, and that was where I wanted to go with the heart aspect of that. If we can work on our personal relationship with God, then we are, setting the tone for our marriage and our homes out of influence with that.
I believe that passage is 1 Corinthians 7, but also I think 1 Peter 3, I think also talks about that in particular for wives. Yes, can't change other people, but you can influence them by who you are. Make it harder for them to stay the way they are by changing who you are.
Yeah, and also pray for that person. Pray for the heart of that person. Right. I know when I was struggling with my husband's former spouse, if you start praying for somebody, you can't just continue to hate them. I mean, it changes who you are, and oftentimes praying for their heart changes who they are. And prayer does a lot.
There's something really interesting about what you said, Summer. I think when we say, okay, notice who's missing. It's God first, then your spouse, then your children, then others. Where are you? If we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourself, it's kind of just taken for granted that we have a basic respect for ourselves that we then can turn around and use for the benefit of others. Greg Smalley and I talked about this on episode number 76, where we talked about moving from roommates to soulmates in marriage. And he made the point that, if I can't have a sense of who I am, have a self, if I could be a self, then I don't know how to bring the best of me into whatever relationship we're talking about. So it's not self for the sake of self. It's self for the sake of others. I think that's important for stepmoms, especially in this place where you feel like other people are not affirming yourself. Like that has to come between you and God. So Summer, that's where you started. Is that number one priority is really about you finding your identity and then bringing that sense of love, that sense of wholeness, that sense of importance and value to those other relationships.
Yeah, and that actually comes out of experience, not expertise, because Andy and I had to walk through counseling for that, exactly what you're saying, which our therapist let us know that was enmeshment, which I know. I mean, that's where my educational background was too. But when it's yourself, you don't ever want to.
I see it in other people real easily.
So, I can help everybody else, but I can't help myself. So when she pointed that out, it just made so much sense. It's like Andy and I blended really quickly. We definitely did not follow good steps to doing that. And in that, I think not only did I lose my sense of self, but I also struggled with the role that you were saying, Gayla, is like, where do I fit in? So like, not only did I have this lack of sense of self, but I'm also trying to figure out who am I in this new role. And so easily, Andy and I enmeshed. I mean, we just started to have ups and downs together. He has his feelings. Those are okay. He can work through those. Those aren't always my fault. It was that he has his problems. I'm going to join him. Right. And when I talked earlier about needing to emotionally separate, like what I had to do was allow him to have his feelings, not feel responsible for them, take myself aside, work through whatever I was working through with God so that I could show up differently. And that doesn't always fare well, because when you don't show up at the same level, then that feels like rejection to somebody that you've been enmeshed with. Right. So when I separated myself, and Andy too, so I'm not like the expert in this. I'm just saying, when there was a separation and then maybe he was elevated and I stayed emotionally mature in the situation, or maybe I was elevated and he became emotionally mature, that feels like a rejection. So then we have to consciously work through that. It's always just this constant refining process, but I had to find my worth in God and separate my worth from my husband. And that took time.
You just nailed one of my favorite marital therapists. Says therapy is about helping couples separate so they don't have to separate.
It's so true.
Oh, that's good.
So they don't carry one another's emotional pain
Yes.
and fusion and responsibility. And the really important piece here is not that we just kind of emotionally disengage from the other person. No, we care and show compassion, try to listen, try to learn, especially stuff that's about me that I need to change. But what I do with all of that is I shift it to God. Instead of expecting to get it from this person who is a person, is going to fail on some level, it's got to go to God first. That's where I get my identity. Then I come back to offering my best self in the relationship with others.
Yep.
This whole priority stuff it's difficult. It's a challenge. And day in, day out. But I really love the foundation, Summer, that you've just been talking about. Okay, I got one last question for both of you ladies. Ready? Summer says in her book, sometimes rewards don't fall on your weekend. Boy, what a hard reality. What a slap in the face. Okay.
Yeah.
So, deep breath. And how do the people listening, how do they cope with that?
Well, I think we've said here at Blended before that sometimes the honeymoon is at the end of the journey,
Right.
similar to what we're saying here. When you marry, Randy and I married and we had 4 kids under our roof. And you just have to understand there's going to be a lot of life lived before perhaps some of the bigger rewards come along. But like I said, you do grasp on to the small ones, and that's what keeps you going. And maybe you keep a gratitude journal. I did that for a long time. Get up, let's think of one thing I'm thankful for today before I go to bed and put it in my journal. And if you're focusing on those things, then it keeps you going.
Summer?
Lisa TerKeurst wrote in one of her books, you steer where you stare. And I love that, because if I'm staring at everything I don't have, I'm steering in that direction. And that's where my focus is. And so, in the beginning, I am not going to lie, like those weekends, every other weekend that the kids would go see their mama, I hated it. It was really hard for me to let go of them in those moments, and transitions were hard. And I can look back now and know that was about my control, and that I just didn't have control of that situation at all. And that was a threat to me. But what we did out of that is start to realize we could have these intentional weekends, and we just started traveling. Like, we would date on those weekends that we didn't have the kids, and we would let Eli, our youngest, go stay with my parents, and we would use those times to create our own memories and to have time away. And so I think if we can focus instead of on the lack of control we have on every other weekend, or when those rewards fall, we can start to rejoice that we get to have time alone, and that we don't. I think also in the beginning, I felt it completely necessary to show up to everything, even if it wasn't on our weekend, right? And I had to give myself permission to not show up and not have that expectation of myself, because a lot of where I got lost and where I lost my sense of self was identifying with when and how I would show up for them. And then I was putting myself aside. And so, we started taking trips on the weekends, and, the boys didn't love that always. They were like, what? You're not going to be there? And that's okay, because what we're modeling is a healthy marriage in our home. And they need to see that to start to fill in the cracks of where their brokenness happened when it came to, divorce and remarriage. And so I started to tuck away that guilt in my back pockets and know that I could create new times with my new marriage and be able to use those reward weekends to reward myself instead of seeking that in somebody else.
Also, Ron, having a community that you can go to on those times when you're feeling like, gosh, when am I going to get some rewards here? To be able to talk to another stepmom or a step couple, you as a couple, and hear some similar stories, all of a sudden you know that you're not alone. And there is something huge that happens in that. So I think we have to be intentional in building a community of others who are walking a similar journey.
Yeah. I mean, connection creates community, right? And if we're not walking in community, I don't think we stay as connected as we need to be to Christ and others, because we don't have accountability partners. We don't have somebody to say, hey, Summer, what's your part in this? And I tend to go, obviously, to I don't have a part in this. So I need people to hold me accountable.
You've been listening to my conversation with Gayla Grace and Summer Butler. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. Hey, if you have a topic or a question you'd like for us to address on a future podcast, you can email it to us. You can actually leave us a voice message if you want to do that. The show notes will tell you how. We actually got a recent note from Shane that meant a lot to us. Your ministry is such a blessing, he says. We married prior to knowing of your resources and were having major issues within the first year. So we Googled step family help and found your conference for blended families. It's changed our marriage. Not in a single day, but in our daily understanding of our family. It changed our approach, our efforts, our conversations. We've been married 7 years now and are happy we found your material for our marriage. We went through your 8-week video series, The Smart Step Family, and now we're teaching that for a second time. Thank you for the work you've done. Praying your ministry continues to grow and bless more blended families. Well, Shane, thank you for that. That's great. Okay, first of all, if you, the listener, are interested in the live events or the resources that he mentioned, go to smartstepfamilies.com to learn more and find all the information you're looking for. But I want you to notice the journey that Shane and his wife went on, because we've heard this story 1,000 times, and you can travel the same journey. The first thing you'll notice is they reached out for help. They found some tools that they could put in their toolbox. But change didn't happen overnight. It took patience and a change of perspective that they walked out over time. Then they started giving back. Now they're teaching the Smart Step Family video series, for example. They're helping other people the way they were helped. Hey, you may not think of yourself as having anything to give to others, but someday you might. That's why each fall we put on the largest step family ministry training event in the entire world. This year, the Summit on Step Family Ministry is going to be in Phoenix, October 13 and 14, 2022. We bring together leaders and lay couples alike to network with others and learn the latest strategies to minister to one of the largest untargeted family groups in the country, blended families. This is an in-person event, not a live-streamed event, so get it on your calendar and make plans to join us. Visit summitonstepfamilies.com for all the details. That's summitonstepfamilies.com, or you can just look in the show notes. If you'd like more information about my guests, you'll find it in the show notes, or you can just check it out on the Family Life Blended podcast page. That's familylife.com/blended podcast. And did I mention that you can find small groups in your area on our searchable map? Did I mention that videos, live events, resources, and books for blended families like The Smart Stepmom or Gayla Grace's book, Step Parenting with Grace, in my newest book for engaged couples preparing to blend, you can find all of that on our website. Be sure and check it out. The show notes will tell you how. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, you certainly can. We'd love for you to do that. That way you won't miss any future episodes. You can find us on the Family Life app or, of course, your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. You can even watch us on YouTube if you'd prefer that. Just get the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Just search Family Life Blended. Next time, we're going to hear from Krista Smith Larson about creative games families can play that open dialogue about your blended family.
Together, it always helped us make memories. It always helped us laugh. And sometimes it gets intense in blended families. And so to just take a break and to laugh as a family was very healing.
That's Krista Smith Larson next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our monthly donors who make this podcast possible. If you'd like to say thank you for what the podcast offers you, just look in the show notes for a link. Every dollar counts, and we are thankful for it. Our producer is Marcus Holt, mastering engineer Jarrett Roski, project coordinator Ann Caro, and theme music composed and performed by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.